Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Tony Tompkins Show, a very special edition of the Tony Tompkins Show today. And I just need to let everybody know I've got the same problem I had last time I did a live feed, and that isn't coming up on YouTube in terms of my screen, but I know it's going through to all of you. So, those of you that want to join in this conversation, it is important that you do so. We will note and have a look at all your comments as well. Because today I've got a very special person that's joining me. And hopefully, I'm also sending this to his YouTube channel, and he can tell you a little bit more about that. And that is Nathan Ogilvie. But before I introduce Nathan to you, we want to talk a little bit about what today is about. So, as most of you know, on Sunday there was this massacre at Bondi Beach, an horrific event, an event which has caused all of us start to think a little bit about who we are, as my wife just told me that he's going through, so that's good. So today we're going to talk about what that means. Nathan is a psychologist, and he'll tell you a little bit about his background and who he is and why he's on my channel and why he has his own channel, for that matter, a channel which I hope most of you will find the time to subscribe to. And while I don't forget to subscribe to my own channel, ring the bell for further notifications, and because it's free, it doesn't cost you anything. So please do that as well. But Nathan is a young person. He's a little bit younger than myself. In fact, quite younger than me. And he will offer a different perspective, I guess, on some of the issues that impact you and I. So I'd like to think that we can have a lively discussion with you about the Bondi massacre. And now, what I'm really particularly interested in, how it impacts all of us. So we've got a number of people online. Thanks very much, guys. Could you please put a comment? Let us know that you're there. And it's really helpful if you let us know where you're from as well, so we get a sense of the geographical implications of this particular podcast. And Nathan and I are going to have a live discussion about what this stands for in terms of how it affects all of us, the massacre, and how it is to be interpreted, and how politics will play a major part in how we view what's happening in terms of anti-Semitism in this country and how we can best combat it. And today I'm also going to play a couple of clips for you, one from Anthony Loewenstein when he was on CNN recently, today in fact, talking about this. He is a Jewish person, a Jewish journalist in fact, that's talking about not just this event but the impact of what's happening in Gaza and the IDF's response to that. And also we're going to play a little bit of a clip from my favourite Sky person at Sky News, namely Andrew Bolt, about his take, just to draw this comparison for all of you to have a look at this. So please comment in the comment section. I would love to hear from you. And I'll just got to, at this particular point, introduce the wonderful, the only Nathan Ogilvie. Hi, Nat. Good to see you, mate.
Hi, Tony. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, this is a joint effort. This is an effort for you and I to talk about things that matter to both of us. And I know that we both have a specific strain or whatever in terms of how we might view politics. I guess I'm about to find that out from you. We haven't had a great in-depth conversation, but I thought you could just start by, and Jenny, yes, it is live. So Jenny's just commented on the comment section, so sorry about that. But yes, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're here, and a bit about your background?
Yes, my name is Nathan, and so I'm a psychologist based in Melbourne, Victoria, and I've been in Australia my whole life, and I've really been interested in politics pretty much since high school and onwards. And I've recently started the channel this year. It's called The Rightist Leftist. I am on politically on the left. I just wanted to show the book. Anyone doesn't believe me, the book I'm reading at the moment, reading Bernie Sanders' new book, Fight Oligarchy.
All right.
But the joke in the name is that the rightist leftist being a play on words, but also a bit of the absurdity of pretty much what I talk about is the idea of the everyday Aussies and how Bernie Sanders describes it. You know, everyday people versus the billionaires, the 99% versus the 1%. Because I think people like Donald Trump and in Australia, more of the right wing, bought and owned by the billionaires. Like there was that picture of Peter Dutton on the plane with Gina Reinhart, just completely funded by billionaires and don't care about everyday people. They pretend to care, but they don't actually care. And the more and more I look into politics, so I come from a psychological point of view. My channel started as a way to ask the question, why do people vote for who they vote for? The information that they take in and how they process that information. So very much a psychological point of view. But the more and more I get into studying politics, I'm realizing how much it's related to the economy and how rigged it is against everyday people. And what actually gives me hope, and I try and take a hopeful point of view, even though a lot of the stuff we talk about is very dark, especially what we're going to talk about today. It's actually unriggable, and that's why I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders and his approach, the social democrat approach of a social safety net, raising the floor so we don't have to have 1 in 7 Australians living in poverty, 1 in 5 households living in food insecurity. A lot of people in Australia are doing well, but just because you're doing well, you shouldn't have to pull the ladder up behind you and leave those struggling Aussies behind. And yeah, that's pretty much my point of view. I'm not a politician or a policy expert at all, so I'm sort of educating myself as I do the channel.
But there again, the reality is who is, like, like who really is an expert? We have all these people on Sky News and making commentary around the country, and people just like us who have a point of view that I guess that needs to be spoken about, because someone needs to push back against what's happening in the right of politics. So I was interested. I'll be interested to hear what you think specifically about Sunday's event, and what point of view would you like to take around that you think you could share with everybody, and we could start the conversation there.
Yeah, I think first just acknowledging that it came out of nowhere. It was a complete shock, as terrorist attacks are, but we haven't had something like that in Australia happen for so long. I was just in bed. It was sort of later in the day and I'd had a big weekend. So I was just lying in bed and I saw the article flash up. I regularly check the ABC, the woke leftist ABC. But I think that it's going to change a lot in Australia. They're already talking about different policies and things. But the video I just posted today, I like I try to do in life and in this political space, is just take a humanist approach and recognize in terms of, it was clearly a targeted racial attack. It was 2 Muslims attacking a bunch of Jewish people. And I'm very connected with, I'm not a Jewish person myself. I'm not in the Jewish community, but I work with them. So when I started in private practice, I was working in Caulfield, which is one of the main suburbs where the Jewish people live in Melbourne. Not the only one, there's like a whole area there, but I worked really closely, and I still do, with the Jewish community, and my heart goes out to all of them. And that's what my video was just about, how heartbreaking that is for the community. We're going to talk about anti-Semitism and how, persecuted the Jewish community has been for thousands of years, but still to today. But also on the other end of the Muslim side, that Ahmed al-Ahmed, who jumped on one of the attackers and definitely prevented a lot of deaths, was Muslim himself. So I know that this is already starting to be politicized by people, but I'm trying to stay out of that side of it for now and just look at the human aspect of a 10-year-old girl lost her life. I've got a 2-year-old daughter. So many friends and family of people who are now without, going into their Hanukkah period, Christmas. I'm Christian. Christmas for us, this holiday period that's supposed to be enjoyable, families being ripped apart with this news, and Australia now in mourning. It's just horrible.
How do you think Australians generally are responding? Given, do you think Australians were conscious of the degree of anti-Semitism in the community, or we just ignored it as being, occasionally someone would, attack a mosque, or someone would write something over a childcare centre or whatever? We kind of, I just wonder whether to some extent for most Australians, not me specifically, because it's been a concern for me for a long time, but I was wondering whether for most Australians it would have been horrific to see this happen in the scale that it did.
For the first part, are most Australians aware? Probably not. The Jewish community is a big community in Australia, but not, if you look at it as a portion of the population. I don't even know if we have live fact checkers, or you fact check Tony, we could see what portion of the population they are. It's very small.
I can tell you actually, there's 120,000 Jewish people, registered Jewish people in Australia, according to the 2023 or whenever it was census. So if that's any help to you.
Yeah. So it's a very small part of the Australian population as a percentage, but a very strong community and very proud of their heritage. And yeah, I think it's just shocking when a terrorist attack like that happens. Australia, it's very different because of our gun laws and all of that. It's much more rare. In America, there's mass shootings all the time, and every single one of those is a tragedy. But now they're at a point where they don't even report it on the news anymore because it's so common. So I think most people probably weren't aware of the bubbling, and I don't think it's just the anti-Semitism. That's definitely a huge part of it. But just the racial tensions. People look at One Nation, their vote increasing, and their key policy is anti-immigration. My point of view that I always try and push back on is I call it everyday Aussies, but the idea it's not about being post-racial and not looking at race, because some people have criticized me saying I'm like trying to be race blind. It's not about that. It's actually just celebrating our differences, that we are a multicultural nation. We're a nation of immigrants. Even, except for the, Aboriginals and people that were originally here, all of us came to Australia, or our grandparents or ancestors came to Australia at some point. And we should celebrate that and learn from each other's cultures and celebrate each other's cultures and look at that as a positive thing, that diversity. And it's just horrible that some people don't see it that way. And I don't know why.
Well, I was just going to ask you why, because I support all of those arguments you just made. I've been talking about that for years, that we should celebrate our multiculturalism, and that all of us, if we're non-Aboriginal, all of us, from our heritage came from somewhere else, and that we should celebrate and think about that notion. And the other thing too that occurred to me the other day was that we have a history of violence in this country, which very rarely gets acknowledged, and the violence against Indigenous people. And, we see it even today. There's a report out recently, I don't know whether you saw it or not, but the number of deaths in custody in Australia is at an all-time high for Aboriginal people. And that there's so much about our society that should be celebrated, multiculturalism being, of course, one of them. But there's so much about our society which we need to deal with. We need to confront, and we need to be honest with, because quite frankly, we have exhibited violent and abusive behaviour to minorities in this country, and we still do to this day. I don't know what you think about that. Is that something that sits with you as well?
The data shows it. You just said the reports show it, that's what happens. From a psychological point of view, there's cognitive behavior therapy is kind of the gold standard of treatment. And one of the things that it looks at is cognitive distortions. It's sort of the ways that we look at the world that don't always reflect reality. And the most common one that a lot of people can get on board with or understand is like all or nothing thinking, or it's also called black and white thinking. Seeing as this or that, and there's no gray area in between. And like with most topics, there's gray area. The cognitive distortion that I think sort of underpins racism is called overgeneralization, where you sort of take one event or one instance, or in a case of a race of people, one person, and then you generalize you say then they're all like that. So you see a black person commit a crime, or all black people are criminals. The counterpoint, I'm getting good, Tony, at fighting back the right-wing talking points, because people obviously comment and I start to have to answer to those. They'll say, oh, but if you look at the data, they're actually more, maybe they're not all bad, but more of them are than white people. When you actually look at the data, that's not even the case at all. We know migrant crime as a percentage is actually less than that. And that's the question I sort of say is like, with Ahmed as an example, who saved lives, he's a Muslim. So I hope we don't do this overgeneralization of races and putting them all in a box, because that's kind of where the rightist leftist comes from, is like putting people in boxes is easy because it's a mental shortcut and it makes the world simple, but the world isn't simple. And when we start doing that, and if it comes out in that form of racism, then horrible policies and horrible things flow from that.
So this brings me to something I wanted, just a couple of videos that I wanted to play, because Nathan, you touched upon this point, and one of my primary concerns is, and incidentally, lots of people online at the moment, and lots of conversations are being had. Just want to let you know that. But and I'll bring up, for those people that are chatting away, I will at some point reflect on some of the stuff that you're saying. And someone said, "Oh yeah, about Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce's political point. And this is what I want to talk about. I want us to have a conversation. I want everybody online to start to think about to what extent has all of this, the issue around what happened on Sunday, as horrible as it is, how it has become politicized, and whether the politicization of a horrible event is justifiable. Is justifiable, because to me it appears that it is all about scoring points as best as one side can against another. And the only side I notice at the moment that's endeavouring to score those points happens to be the right of politics. And I'm going to bring up a couple of examples of that. So I'm going to just play a brief section of my favourite, well, I wouldn't say my favourite, that was an overstatement, but certainly but Andrew Bolt, what can I say? Andrew Bolt, who is the human excrement of all time, I reckon. And I'm just going to play this segment of his, and I'll just play this first. Then Nathan and I will talk about it. You people online comment about it, and then I'll play another session, which is a counter view of this by Anthony Neuenstein, and we'll see where we go from there. So here it is.
I cannot deny that Albanese made Jews feel abandoned, and he made this attack and future ones actually more likely. He acted recklessly when all the evidence should have screamed at him, as it has screamed at me for decades, that this Jew hatred was growing and growing deadly. Did Albanese not only fail to confront it, he fed that hatred instead. Now I want to break this up into two parts. First, the warning signs that this government ignored, and then I'll go through how the government instead made this horror more likely. Now, we shouldn't actually be surprised that this massacre yesterday happened, because many Jews have feared this for years, as have I. And you consider, for decades even, this country's leaders persisted in bringing in people from war-torn, backward tribal countries with very different values, when the odds were, of course, that they would struggle to fit in. And
I'm gonna stop it. I'm gonna stop it at that, because that to me is in essence everything that concerns me, Nathan. That is so he starts with this notion that we're bringing people in who do not fit with our culture. And can you talk to us a little bit about that in terms of how do we define culture? What does it look like? Who determines what is appropriate culture or not? And who controls it to the extent whereby we can say to somebody, well, you don't fit with us, so bugger off, mate. We don't give a shit about you. We're going to send you back to wherever you came from. So those notions about, people saying to other people, go back to where you came from. Basically, people like Andrew Bolt are kind of saying the same thing, but they're a little bit more long-winded about it, perhaps. What do you think?
That's probably, first of all, the most Sky News I've watched in one sitting for many years. It's just,
well, you haven't missed out on much.
I watch it through you, Tony. It's just unwatchable. Yeah, I mean, he was just doing exactly what I said, the overgeneralization, the tribal countries that don't share our values, just heaping a group of people in together that there's no variety. So that's part of that. I don't know. I just had to look up. Andrew Bolt's age is 66. I don't know how old you are, Tony, but I'm guessing you guys must be around the same generation. Or the thing
I can't tell you how much I love you right now. No, I'm 74.
Okay. Well, my psychological question,
sort of the same generation, though.
Yeah,
You're
my
right.
psychological question is, how can two people, yourself and Andrew Bolt, divert so much? And I look at it through incentives, because I look at that and I think he probably believes some of what he's saying, but obviously he's well paid. I don't know what his salary is. He's obviously clearly a multi-millionaire, whether he gets $1 million plus a year. I see a lot of the cultural, like you sort of said, what is culture, or what do I think about this stuff? It's really a distraction from the economic issues, really. I'm sure that he does support, like, I'm not doubting his support for the Jewish community and his hatred of Albanese. They clearly hate workers. But I always think of that quote, the man that earns $1,000 an hour has convinced the man earning $30 an hour to go after the man earning $2 an hour, or woman. That is what's happening, I think. Like Sky News is Rupert Murdoch, right? They're owned by News Corp.
Mm-hmm.
Rupert Murdoch is a multi-billionaire. So basically, Andrew Bolt is Rupert Murdoch's sugar baby. He's paid by the billionaire. He's a millionaire paid by billionaires to spout out. I'm starting to call it right-wing slopaganda. I was calling it right-wing propaganda and right-wing slop. Like there's this AI slop. It's just stuff that's generated by a machine and has no human value. So I'm calling it right-wing slopaganda because there really is no value to what he's saying. Because the thing is, we're talking about deaths and caring about people's deaths. There's Jared Madwick and Reese Corio. I don't know if you know those names, but those are the two blokes. Trigger warning here for some suicide talk. They both ended their life because they were being hounded by the robo-debt. The robo-debt scandal,
yep.
where it was actually money that they didn't owe. It was a technical error, and they were getting hounded so much by the government they ended their lives. I don't think Sky News has ever talked about it, not one word. And so when they pretend to care about people's lives, they're very selective in who they care about because it serves their political agenda, which is to make the rich richer and to make everyday Aussies turn against each other.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And thanks for raising robo-debt as an issue, because that was a failure which cost people's lives, no doubt about that. And also it impacted people's mental well-being, not just around suicidal ideation, but destroyed people's lives, and in many, many ways, I think. And there's never, shouldn't talk about robo-debt for too long. Maybe this is a subject that we could take up, though, at some point. It's one of my wife's favourite topics, because this is about a failure. See, that's failure of government in one way. What people like Bolt are trying to convince us is that government has failed simply because government has been unable to identify, and this is the thing that really gets to me, Nate, that somehow the government has been unable to find these two men who are sitting at home, whatever they're doing, concocting this event. And one of them apparently did have some contact with some ISIS movement or something in Australia. I don't know. We don't know the full story about that just yet, but I'm sure that'll trickle out over time and give more fuel to the right to say whatever they need to say. But the point is, though, that there's so little information gathered about them, and yet we conflate whatever it is that we hear into a picture which tells us that for some reason, and they should have known. It's like somehow, I reckon people like Andrew Bolt expect governments to be so omniscient that they know everything about everything, and as a result of that, they should be able to act. And I find that just the most bizarre notion on earth. But there again, I think people accept that somehow governments... I was listening to an interview with Albanese and the AFP and all the other dudes involved, and the press were relentless. Like, I've never known... The Australian press is pretty aggressive at the best of times, but I've never known them to be so aggressive. Why didn't you know this? How come you didn't know they were doing this? How come you didn't, And it's beyond me how the government possibly would have ever known every final movement that anybody would make that would turn out to be such an horrific event.
Well, that's the question. And this is where I've been told, I don't know, you might see, I'll see if you agree with this, Tony. I get told that the right wing are the party of freedom. They're the ones that are for freedom, and the left are not for freedom. But what they're talking about is essentially, and they've already been doing it since George Bush in America, is a surveillance state where we're just tracked all the time, and that they should know every single movement. Because I actually had a video with my supervisor's a forensic psychologist, and he works in the space around violent offenders and things like that. And he kind of calls it, I'll get the exact term wrong, but it's basically the price of freedom, which is in a society where we are free, there are going to be we live amongst psychos and crazy people and people that want to do harm, and we know things that work and things that don't work, and as a society, that's the things that we can debate. But yeah, look, I should caveat too. I'm not really a fan. I'm not a Labor voter. I don't know how I'm coming across to people saying I'm a lefty. I don't ascribe to any political party. I'm an independent right now, so I'm not the biggest fan of Albanese. But yeah, the idea that this should have been picked up on, it's definitely too early now. We can't, we probably might even look a bit silly if we start speculating now, because we got to let the agencies do their jobs. What I would be more in favor of is definitely, the gun control. Obviously, that's something that's slowly crept up. Apparently, I don't know the exact ratio of guns to people in Australia, but it's actually quite high. So over the last, 30 years since the Port Arthur massacre, we've had strong gun laws. But what I've heard is that it's actually it's a little easier to get guns than we think. The perception of the world. I was actually just watching a stream from Americans before I signed on to this, that the perception is Australia, like guns are banned and there's no guns in Australia. That's not true at all. We have lots of guns in Australia. So it's about that thing. If the right wing want to say they're for freedom, they also need to square that circle, or they need to round that circle on, then are we going to all be surveilled? So there'll be never a terrorist attack again, like no violence anymore. That means mass surveillance and mass control. And they should just say it. Like, if that's what they think, they should just say it. And that's what that's why I can't watch more than that. The hypocrisy and the internal logic that just never adds up is, and they don't, obviously, I don't know if they'd have any lefties on. Like, I'd love to go on. Andrew Bolt, if you're watching this, please have me on. But
I said that to my wife. I said, look, if Andrew Bolt rang me and Connie, would I go on? I don't know whether I've got that much courage to be abused. But a couple of things came out of what you just said, though, and I think one of them is gun control, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I reckon that they are seeking a state similar to the Trump administration, where they want to control everybody who comes into the country. If you're from a different country, if you have a different coloured skin, if you're non-white, I guess, then you are an enemy of the state and need to be dealt as such. Or they'll continue to surveil us to a point whereby the tech bros will get involved, and we'll find that our phones are recording everything, well, some of them are anyway, but certainly recording all the things that we say, and that's being stored somewhere. And then we have this big brother syndrome coming in. And so I think we're heading down a terrible path. The other thing about gun control that fascinates me is my wife was telling me that on X, there is a lot of people in the United States who are saying, well, frankly, if you just had more guns, then that would have been fine. You would have been able to, deal with this dude beforehand. And the other thing about this, which is I'm finding really irritating, is that there's a lot of criticism of the police not being present. And as someone said, the police were there, right? I saw a report actually on Fox News talking about this, focusing on the fact that the police took 30 minutes to get there. Well, that's not true. The police were present. They had guns. The other guys had long rifles. So the differentiating there is like, it's like taking a knife to a gunfight. It just wasn't going to happen appropriately. But anyway, the criticism just keeps coming in, I think. And there's an issue about how we deal with it politically. So I want to play for everybody this. I might play most of what Anthony Loewenstein says, because this is the other alternative, which is already covered, which he covers some of the things that we've kind of talked about, but does it from a completely different perspective. He's taking it from the perspective of a Jewish person who's a journalist, well-informed, talking to a international network such as CNN.
Joining me now from Sydney is journalist and author of The Palestine Laboratory, Anthony Loewenstein. Thank you so much for joining us, Anthony. I mean, what's your view on what we saw swell up here?
I am shocked, but sadly not surprised. Not that Australia's used to mass shootings. We're not. The last mass shooting was 30 years ago in Port Arthur in Tasmania, and it was not a religious attack at all. This one apparently is. Look, the issue of anti-Semitism is an important one. I speak to you as an Australian and a Jew, and anti-Semitism is real and has been growing, certainly since October 7. However, and it's a very important however, as someone who has spent years supporting Palestine and talking about what's happening in Gaza and rightly calling it a genocide, too many of the pro-Israel groups in Australia and elsewhere are conflating blind support for Israel with anti-Semitism. And the problem here we have is that too often, when there's a rational debate, there are public protests in Australia. The Australian government recognised Palestine, although it's worth saying that Australia still sends F-35 fighter jet parts to Israel. So to suggest somehow the Australian government's anti-Israel is absurd. We live in a flawed democracy, and free speech means you're able to criticise Israel. We are not living in Israel. We are living in Australia. And as a Jewish Australian, we have the right to support Israel or criticise Israel. But one of the things that frustrates me is that so often we hear the elements of the Jewish community putting pressure on the Australian government to almost censor legitimate free speech on Palestine, shutting it down, putting pressure on universities to silence legitimate criticism of Israel. A democracy allows criticism of a foreign state. And I think too often this is forgotten in the rush to blindly support Netanyahu and his friends.
He's pretty categorically blaming the Australian government for inflaming anti-Semitism, isn't he?
Yes.
By recognising Israel. Is that what you're talking about? The conflation here, you know, there are two separate, broad, you know, obviously massively connected issues or groups here. There's the Jewish community and there's the Israeli government. And as you say, it's reached this sensitive area when he gets involved in international Jewish communities. I mean, how would you describe it?
I mean, Israel claims to be, well, is the world's only Jewish state, and Netanyahu, as the current prime minister, often says that he's the leader of the world's Jewry. I mean, it's an absurd claim. There are only roughly 15, 16 million Jews in the world. It's a very small population. And within hours of this horrific terrorist attack in Sydney, you had Netanyahu and many members of the Israeli government publicly on social media and elsewhere saying that somehow this was the fault of an Australian government to recognise Palestine. I mean, it makes utterly no sense on its face. We don't really know the motives of these killers. They seem to have some association with Islamic State or at least radical Islam. And when it happened, my first thought was it's either going to be neo-Nazis, who sadly are also rising in popularity and strength in Australia, or Islamists, and it certainly appears to be the latter. Look, ultimately, the question is what makes Jews and others safe? And what makes us safe is not an Israeli government credibly accused of mass crimes and genocide intervening in Australia. I mean, this is an absurd situation where the talking points of an Israeli government, credibly accused and wanted by the International Criminal Court, are repeated by pro-Israel forces. And I noticed that there are many Jewish groups, including the one I'm involved with, the Jewish Council of Australia, and others, that legitimately say that we have a right to safety and security, but our safety, in fact, is worsened by Israeli actions. You know, it's more unsafe, Max, to be a Jew in Israel than any other place on the planet. Now, none of that...
So we'll just leave him there. He only talks for a couple more minutes, but it's worth having a look at the rest of that interview if you so desire. I do have a comment here which I will play, which I'll put up, hopefully, which actually says around 15 guns per 100 people in Australia, 25% increase since Port Arthur law was introduced. So, and a valid point. So thanks for raising that point. I guess that kind of answers your question there to some extent, Nathan, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I fact checked myself too. It's one in, about, if you look at it per person, it's 1 in 30 Australians has a gun license. So there's a lot of guns in Australia.
Which surprised me because I wouldn't even know where to get a gun. I just, my wife and I were in America a few years ago, and we walked into Walmart, and there was a whole aisle of all sorts of weapons, and it just surprised us to see so many. I'm not in that space, but obviously some people are. But clearly, it's an area which needs to be addressed.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people in the United States telling us that, well, you should just have more guns. But I want to come back to Anthony's point, though, that really needs to be discussed, I reckon, and that is the conflation between what happened in Gaza and the genocide and the spread of anti-Semitism. And I was wondering whether you could comment on October the 7th and what 2023 and what that meant, and how that may have, I don't know your view on it, but how it may have inflamed anti Semitism given all those people that decided to protest against what's happening in Gaza and support a Palestinian state. What do you think, mate?
Yeah, well, on October 7th, I actually have a close personal friend who used to be a manager of mine, who's Australian now, Australian citizen, but grew up in Israel, and they're I don't know I'm gonna get it. It's not suburb, but like I think they call it village or the kibbutz. Had people, family members, and friends die in that terrorist attack. So yeah, it was horrible. It was I hear it described kind of as Israel's 9/11 in terms of its significance. So absolutely horrible. And this is where I it goes back to the black and white thinking, the generalizations is I don't understand why we can't have space in our hearts for Israeli people, Palestinian people, Muslim people, Australian people, and criticize the governments and the leaders, because I'm not a fan of Netanyahu. I know this is a G-rated channel, so I won't say my thoughts on him. But I have this kind of thing in my personal life. When I was sort of in my early 20s and going out, I would sort of ask myself, like, what would 40-year-old Nathan think of what I'm about to do? Like, looking back, will this decision be something I'll be proud of or not? Now, I didn't always make the best decision, but I kind of looked ahead to like, what would history look back on my my decision? And I think Israel and Netanyahu, the stuff that they're doing at the moment, and I think a lot of, as in that video we just saw, a lot of Jewish communities and community groups are realizing what's going on and are seeing that distinction too, that the anti-Semitism issue, we need to stamp down on and be more inclusive and address that, absolutely. But what the Israeli government is doing, and I put it on the hands of Netanyahu, trying to get out of his corruption charges by keeping this going, is a genocide and abhorrent. And it's like, what are we going to look back in 50 years at this time? And once the hangover's over, I hope people come to the right side of humanity and go, deaths need to stop. I think we can all agree that we need to do whatever we can to end the violence. Like in terms of the bigger picture, I'm anti-war, and we need to, like, that's one thing I have hope for Trump on, even though I don't think he's doing a good job at it, of trying to bring peace to the Middle East. But in terms of Australia, we need to decouple that issue, that you can love all people and be critical of, like, if it's white people being anti-Semitic, being critical of those people and seeing the delineation between the people and the governments. That's kind of my view on that.
Yeah, and I think that it's shameful that we're unable to say, and I've never heard Sky News say, for example, we hold Sky News up as that epitome of the right.
Well, they're in the
because
right.
they are the, they are the mouthpiece for everything that's right wing. I haven't heard any of them say that they are appalled at the 20,000 children that have been killed. Not once. And I haven't heard them say, Nathan, that that the destruction of towns and the demolishing of buildings was appropriate and justifiable. I haven't heard them say that the destroying of hospitals and the bombing of schools was also appropriate. I mean, the argument always is that there are Hamas supporters underneath in tunnels and that sort of shit, something that's never really been proven, I don't think. But nevertheless, the death rate is high. So one wonders why we need to, right, it's that very point you raised. Why isn't it that people can't see that one side, that the killing of people is wrong, and that was October the 7th and what happened afterwards? And that the proportionality around all of that is way out of sync with the actual initial event. And that there is an obsession by Netanyahu and his bunch of hoods to actually wipe out the Palestinians. And why can't people see that getting upset about that and trying to fight for the Palestinians in Gaza, why can't people see that that's a righteous fight? And why can't people see that anti-Semitism is wrong? And why are the two conflated together in the first place? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think at a very cynical angle, I think the anti-Semitism becomes that political tool to not have to address those issues, because you can brand someone as anti-Semitic and then you don't have to address those deeper things. I think as well, the answer really, sadly, I think just comes down to self-interest as well. Like with Trump and the Epstein files, Trump is clearly a pedophile. There's no doubt about it. Like all the stuff that's coming out and being hidden, there's compromising material on him. And that's probably, and there's all those links to potentially Mossad. I'm saying potentially and allegedly because now this is being broadcast. But you look at, especially with Netanyahu, the self-interest, he wants to stay in power. And he's got these corruption charges, which are very serious. And they were just about to be trialed before October 7th happened. And I don't know how much you've looked into this, Tony, or your audience, but there's actually some reporting that they had heard about October 7th potentially happening and didn't take the proper measures to stop it. And now, absolutely, and this is where I'm, again, delineating the people and the government. I'm not victim blaming at all. That was a horrible terrorist attack and should have been prevented. And if these world leaders and business people, and I go to the Sky News people, why do they? Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That's my frustration with the right-wing news. It's not the right-wing slopaganda. It's what they don't say. It's just the stuff that they ignore. They have humanity for one group and then no humanity. They basically talk about them like they're animals. That's like the othering of them, like these people or the tribe or whatever you call, whatever Andrew Bolt said. We don't even need to repeat it. I think it just comes down for those wealthy, powerful people, the self-interest, and then that's what infects our politics too in Australia. Why we don't have, I say, why we can't have nice things, because these self-interested people are just going to keep trying to accrue wealth and power at the expense of everyone else.
It's so true. Good, and believe me, as a social worker, mate, I've been fighting against that my entire professional life. Someone did raise a point here, which I'll bring up for you to have a look at, which someone raised to me the other day, and I thought this is spot on. I couldn't agree more on this. Let's see if I can bring it up. Sadly, the Christchurch massacre has shown these barbaric criminals can be homegrown extreme right-wing racists. Remembering that the Christchurch massacre was done by an Australian, I hasten to add, and do we need to? And we often forget that was against mosques and people who were not Jewish, and we forget the horrors that caused. I think there was 50 people killed or some enormous number. I can't remember the exact number in that, but certainly, we forget about those horrors. I think New Zealand has pretty much handled that and recovered as well as they could, and thank God they had Jacinda Ardern there at that particular time, who really was able to grapple with it and deal with it appropriately. The question here is, do we have someone in Albanese who can do the same? I think actually we do. When I think of the alternative, Susan Lee, I'm not inspired enough to think that she necessarily would have whatever it takes to deal with a crisis such as this. Okay, I just wanted to. Do you want to make any statements at this point? Because I was just going to run through some of the comments that we've got.
Yeah, just on that, I agree. I don't have the name of that commenter, but I agree with what they said, and this is exactly the point, that they have Sky News and all the right-wing slopaganda have all the criticism of Muslims attacking people. But then when it's a white person or a right-wing person, it's just radio silence. And that's the thing. That's what frustrates me, is you should just be against violence. And it shouldn't be it shouldn't be a trauma comparison, like the who's the worst terrorist Olympics. All terrorism is bad. Yeah. We need to stamp it all out. And they don't do that. And if they did that, I would have more respect for them. Or if they either said, look, if they were just openly racist, like this is the weird thing about Pauline Hanson, is I oddly have more respect for her than the Liberals, because so many of them feel the same way as her, but they don't say it. She at least says it. So we can at least, it's that thing, an asshole who knows they're an asshole gets more respect from me than someone who pretends to be a nice person or polite when they're thinking those same thoughts. So yeah, I agree that either just come out and say you're racist and you don't care about other races, or you're just going to filter out any of the white people crime, or
Yeah.
come to the table and say, yes, the right-wing crime is a problem too, and we can have a conversation as a society about how to stop all terrorism and crime. That's my view. I prefer the second, but I don't get the world around.
I've got a comment here I'll put up as well, another one. If only the British hadn't created a Zionist home state inside Palestine, the British caused so many problems around the world. My wife would love that. She's got a very soft spot, said sarcastically, about the British and their imperialism. But it's true. Could you imagine for a moment if okay, I had this thought the other day was, how would the world be right at this moment if Israel didn't exist? Like if people that were Jewish escaping the Holocaust, horriblest event in humankind, but if people escaping that chose to move to other countries, because a lot of people moved to America, to Europe, to other countries that were not governed by Germany at the end of the World War. So, what would the world look like if those people moved elsewhere and a Palestine state wasn't created by the British in 1946? How would things be different?
Yeah, look, again, foreign policy is not my strength, but everything I've seen about all of this issue is it really is a land dispute at this point. There's obviously the religious and cultural clashes and aspects too, but I think there was that 1967 map. If you've seen that one, I think that's what they call the two-state solution, where basically neither side really get exactly all of what they want, but at least it's a way that they could live in peace. I think that's the best thing I've seen. I'm sure there's probably better ideas than that, but I think at this point, yeah, we could ask the question of what happened if it was never created, but it is there. So who knows what time.
There was a time in the early 20th century where Palestinians and Jewish people lived together in harmony.
Yeah,
there was a time.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, of course, it's possible. We have to be extremely naive to think that it was impossible for people with differing viewpoints to live together. Does it mean LGBTQI plus people could not live with people that were straight? No, that's a stupid notion. Does it mean people that are artistically inclined cannot live with those people that are? Does it mean that those people that are tech bros can't live with people who are not? I mean, we can all live with each other, regardless of where we come from, what color our skin is, and whatever. And someone said to me the other day, one of the best lessons I learned this a long time ago too. One of the best things somebody could do is to have a conversation with somebody whom they don't understand.
Yeah.
So I used to have people who used to complain to me about Aboriginal people. And I used to think, well, I used to ask the question, who do you know who's Aboriginal? And it'd say nobody. And I said, well, where's the information coming from that you now believe that for whatever reason Aboriginal people are, for example, all drunks? That's not true. I knew a lot of Aboriginal people who were well educated. I went to university with some of them. So find out what people think. I used to work with Aboriginal people.
Yeah, well, it's the overgeneralization.
And got to understand. And got to understand their culture and how they think and how they were persecuted, even today.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's especially with Aboriginals and what people can have the stereotype of them is that's the overgeneralization again. That they're not a culture that was brought up with alcohol, that was introduced to them. Anyway, we don't want to go off topic with that, but I just want to say we talk about why is there this war going on? There's that whole conversation that we haven't really even touched on about, why is there a perpetual war? Like the book 1984, that the world is just in this perpetual war because it serves the military industrial complex, these defense companies. I think in the video we just watched, he talked about that, the weapons manufacturers. Now they donate to political parties, and Sky News is all for one particular political party. I'll let your viewers look up who that might be. So what is the interest in not trying to achieve peace? What's the potential financial interest for these people who either have direct profit from those companies or indirectly through donations through a political party or a political action committee in America, what is the incentives for war to continue perpetually?
Yeah, because there's billions of dollars to be made from the military infrastructure that
billions.
supports these
Yeah.
wars. Yeah, for sure. There's another
So then I
one here
wonder-
that
Yeah, go
oops,
for it.
wrong one. Punched the wrong button. God,
Yeah, that's I
so
just
many
say on
buttons
that. I wonder why. That's why I wonder why do they really want to end the war when they talk about ending anti-Semitism?
Yeah. I don't think they do. Anyway, don't you think that if Trump, just come back to Trump again, we should do, perhaps we could do a session just on American politics at some point, Nathan? What do you think? Don't you
Yeah,
think
well,
that if
the reason's
Yeah, go on.
obvious because Bill Clinton was in the files. A lot of Democrats are in the files. So Joe Biden wouldn't. Joe Biden's wasn't in the files, but he is definitely good friends with people who were, like Bill Gates and all that. So I don't know this person. I'll try to be polite to them because the TDS is saying you have Trump derangement syndrome. I have elite derangement syndrome in the fact that they're all part of it. So left or right, it doesn't matter your
Agreed.
political meeting. Release
Yep.
them all. And that's why Democrats didn't. So I hate that back and forth of like, oh, if they were so bad, why didn't Democrats release it? Because they're in it too. Come on.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Of course they are. And so, but release it, get it all done.
Yeah, and we don't pick sides
Okay.
like that. We're not defending Trump like the right
No,
wing.
no, not at all. Now we've travelled a hell of a distance. We've had quite a few people online. I've been able to. Many of you are having conversations with each other, which is great.
Where can I see
Some-
that? I can't even see that.
You can't see the
On the YouTube
comments?
one, yeah. I'm on the Wirecast one.
All
It's
right,
probably
no,
better
you
if I
can't
don't
see
read
it.
them. I'll let you read them to me, Tony.
I will. I'll. You'll be out. And you can't go back and look at them either. Once they're gone, they're gone.
Oh, right.
But here's another one that I thought I'd put up for you. Sky News actually asked the question why there is more anti-Semitism after genocide in Gaza to about being tone deaf. We talked about that, but that's true. That is totally tone deaf as well. The rich need to fight with each other rather than fight with them. Oh, fair enough. So Sky News actually asked the question why there is more anti-Semitism after. Yeah, I already said that. See, some of these are floating down in front of me and I can't keep up. Right, proportion. So, oh God, I'll put this up anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I missed that. That one jumped away.
here it comes.
Okay.
Proportion since 9/11 attack, the USA military has been responsible directly for nearly 1 million deaths around the world, over 40% civilians.
Can I ask you a question, Tony?
I must confess,
Yeah.
I have a very intellectual and well-informed community happening
Yeah.
here, because they come up with stuff like that, which is, I
Yeah.
think, fabulous.
I was going to say is I'm not
So,
saying this
Yeah.
person.
So, before we go,
Yeah.
any final words from anybody, either online, but particularly from Nathan?
I've really enjoyed this.
How's the experience been? Let's start with that, mate.
Yeah, it's been really good. I hope that you found it an interesting discussion, Tony, because I think for myself, it's, as you can tell, the clearly there's so many ongoing problems in the world, and I think that we talked mostly about anti-Semitism today, and that's risen. It's been so prominent as an issue in terms of now we've had this terrorist attack to face. For me, I think I do get really despondent with politics, even though I try and have a message of hope. And I think what we should do is sort of go back to our sort of small communities, or, as you said, reach out to people that we may not agree with and try and learn from them. I think taking that curiosity approach is always good because we can really get stuck in our information bubbles, and it's uncomfortable to go outside of that. I always say it's like the Christmas lunch when you have to talk to your family who might not share the same political views as you. I think we need to do more of that. And so, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've already learned so much in this 45 or nearly an hour time. I've really enjoyed it.
And I too. So I do need to tell people that potentially Avery and I will be together on Thursday again. Avery is one of those guys he's got a certain following. Let's put it that way. And they like the way he presents, so that's fine. So Thursday it will be Avery and I again. And I just want to say, and look, could you just tell us and I should have made a 1/3 for it. Just tell us what your site is. People log on,
Yep.
subscribe to Nathan's site. The first thing you do, please subscribe to his site.
Yeah, it's The Rightist Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie. I've just typed it in your chat. So
Good. Done.
subscribe, follow for this millennial
become a
views
part.
on.
And I'm hoping, I'll talk to you about that in a moment when we sign off, but there's a chance we might do it again.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good.
I'd love to interview you, Tony, on my channel too, because
I'm hoping that's what we can do.
I think you have a lot to share to my audience, because my audience are a bit all over the place politically. I kind of intentionally keep myself a little vague for that reason, because I love that people with different views coming together. It creates a little conflict, but it's also enlightening.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I'm happy to do sort of co-responding, whatever you like to call it. Just to like to remind everybody to subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications, do what you need to do. And if you had a super chat and you can send us a cup of money for a cup of coffee, that would also be helpful. And I want to thank Nathan for the inaugural conversation on the Tony Tonkin Show. I am personally hoping that this extremely young individual can return to have a conversation with you all as well. So thanks, Nathan, very much for that. And remember to keep in tune with all the things that are happening around the world that concern me and hopefully concern you. It's important that we have these conversations so that we can keep the conversation alive, so that those of you that share my views can talk about it, and those who don't can argue with those who also share my views. So have a conversation with us. It'd be great for you to be a party to everything that is the Tony Tonkin Show. And please remember to subscribe. And if we don't catch up with you, I hope you have a good holiday.